Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Federation Hall. If you haven't met me, I think you've all met me now. I'm David Sequeira. I'm the director of the Fiona and Sydney Maya Gallery, and I'm also the person that has the privilege of putting together Art Forum here at the VCA. And before I introduce our guest speaker, please join me in grounding yourself in the deep, deep knowledge that for many, many generations, thousands of generations, before the university was considered, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation practiced song and dance on this country. They shared stories, they made sculptures and paintings, they practiced healing here. And join me, with great honour and joy in acknowledging their elders past, present, and those yet to come. Our guest speaker, Nik Pantazopoulos, is an artist and educator based here in Naarm, whose work explores immigrant homosexual narratives. His work remediates art history and public and private space that is influenced by queer culture and erased by hegemonic politics. Nik's studies include a BFA here at the Victorian College of the Arts, honours at RMIT, an MFA at Goldsmiths University, and a PhD at Monash University. And his major installation, Elevations, is currently on show at the Art Gallery of South Australia as part of the 18th Biennial of Australian Art, Inner Sanctum, curated by Jose da Silva. Whether you are in Zoom land or here in Federation Hall, please join me in making Nik very, very welcome. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I can see you. Well, now I kind of can't. That light is glaring, actually. Thanks for inviting me. This will be the first time that I actually will try and talk through the project Elevations that I did for the Adelaide Biennale, so this should be interesting. I've broken the talk up into 3 parts just for me to be able to manage it. So the first part is really influences or interests. I'm going to kind of go through other artists that sort of inspired my thinking for the project in a way that not necessarily I like their work, but I found things interesting about their work. So that'll be the first part. The second part is the written part that I put together for the catalogue that also I've kind of added on to as well after the show, after doing the radio interview, just kind of added more writing. If it doesn't make sense, you can. Lou Hubbard was one of the people that edited it, so blame her. And the third part is me just talking about the working process conversationally. I'm very happy for questions to happen through the third part, but the third part is also to accent this kind of hermetic space that I entered in making the work, which is all about the way I made the project being to leave the studio, which was my home. And so my home is also my studio. So I'm working in a domestic space, and I'm really conscious about the way I'm using space as I'm making work. And this domestic function, this architecture, informs very much the scale, very much what I am doing, my bodily presence in the work. So I'll go through the work in those 3 kind of stages. So before I do begin, I do want to also acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which I stand. To discuss my research practice, I respectfully recognise elders both past and present. Thank you. So I also need to acknowledge the people that supported this project, and that was Creative Australia, the Adelaide Biennale of Australian Art, RMIT, where I work, and that's part of my research fraction to do these kind of research projects, and Kalli, Rolfe Contemporary Art, who operates in some way that kind of represents me and represented me for this project. So I guess really I'm going right back to how I started working, and I started working for this particular research area in lockdown, which I'll go into further. But Yanis Morales was someone that I kind of discovered whilst going to Greece in 2015 or 16. And I was really interested in the facade of the Hilton. And the facade had these kind of very hieroglyphic drawings on the surface of them. And recently they've demolished the whole building but kept this facade. And these hieroglyphics were extremely interesting to me because of the way they spoke in this kind of universal language that had this very parallel kind of way of looking at emojis or cave art, but it was in this kind of modern context of looking at hieroglyphics that spoke a particular type of language that was recognizable. And what I liked about this particular image making, that it predated ancient Greek knowledge, and it was into kind of Egyptian and cave art, and kind of decolonized itself, which was really great to see in this kind of modernist context. Second influence, which I feel like everyone probably know, would be Philip Barlow. And Philip Barlow really became extremely important to my thinking process. I wouldn't say for the aesthetics, because even though her aesthetics are extremely incredible, it'd be about the way she speaks about her working practice and her working process. Also someone that really is grounded in this domestic space and understands her practice being from that of the home and how that work infiltrates other aspects of her making. So it may begin in this kind of daily ritual of working. She comes from a family, so she'd work very early in the morning, and then she'd be continually reflecting on how she makes the work and what time she has to manage the work that she makes. I thought it was really great to see an artist speak of the framework in which they can work, in which it's possible to work, because all artists have other lives, and all those other lives kind of inflect the way you practice. So she's very conscious, and I think that's a really great thing, to be very transparent about the way she practices and the way it infiltrates her world. Next is Pablo Bronstein, and he also is a very domestic artist, also quite different, makes work in a little cottage in Kent. He's very interested in these architectural spaces that are based in English national heritage. These are quite small works, and he works on a tabletop, and they're all hand done. I really like the kind of contrast between the way that Philip Barlow works and the way that Pablo Bronstein works. Frank Stella, which is to me in some ways very surprising, because being educated through the 90s, you're really kind of pushed to be thinking about identity politics, and in many ways, Frank Stella sort of refused them in a very strong way and made work that was very much about formalism. But I think the consistency of his practice over the decades has just proven to be so strong, and he really brings you to the now, to the present. And I think that that's a really strong articulation of the way a modernist or a formalist works. Not really sure why I have Richard Serra here, but I love this image. And I just thought it really spoke very much of this kind of horizontality. And in some ways, it kind of bothers me, but in another way, I find it kind of interesting in relation to my project Elevations. He's much more well known for his kind of big steel structures, but I find these kind of really heavy oil stick drawings that he makes that are kind of mammoth and in scale, quite sexy, quite amazing to look at. But it's problematic as well. I find this whole thing extremely problematic. So I really like thinking about these problems of this horizontal, this artist work in this horizontal space. I think the horizontality will make a lot more sense when I enter my own work. Enrico David is an Italian artist who lives between Berlin and England, and he's very much interested in this kind of psychoanalytic inquiry through a family lens. So he talks very much about the family and his relationship to family from being a gay man. So in the top corner, there's these watercolor drawings that he made, and they're all about his relationship to his mother. But he invented this geisha story where he and his mother played these geisha performances, and he used to speak to her on the phone. She lived in Italy, he lived in London. He used to speak to her on the phone, and they would have these kind of conversations, and he would enact them in his drawings during the day as a way for him to find a way into his art practice. And I also really love the softness of his work and his humiliation. He's always feeling very humiliated. and shy and defeated. And I just think that that softness that he does in his drawing practice is something that we don't really see that often. So I really like that. Next is Helen Johnson, who I think we would all know quite well. I can't really speak for Helen Johnson's content, but I love her horizontality. If you know her work well, sorry, so Richard Serra was a verticality, this is the horizontality, sorry, just to make that clear. Helen Johnson has, I love her flatness. She makes these work that are full of narrative. It's, when I look at them, I feel like I'm reading a long essay. I can really, really observe and look for a very long time. There's a lot going on, sort of like never stops. And she's doing the opposite to Richard Serra in that when she makes her work, she's lying on the ground. That's a really great kind of feminist trope, I would say, because we're used to thinking about it always up on a, thinking about art on a wall, painting on a wall, doing things that are erect. Sorry, I don't mean to make this a lecture. These are just my interests, but it's becoming a lecture. Elizabeth Murray, tell me if I'm speaking too long. Elizabeth Murray is just someone that I discovered through the process of making my research to make my project. An American artist who has these, makes these grand, huge, formal works that have this incredible lusciousness and kind of sensuality to them that they're inescapable to look at. And Charlene von Hoyle, who I also recently just discovered, who the reason why I'm interested in her work is that she works in a way that she's very responsive to herself, and she refuses a lot of other kind of content in the work. So if she's bored by something, she allows herself to move and change directions in what she's doing. She doesn't tie herself down to any particular iconography or image. She continually moves around the surface of her painting. And then I've got Maria Promchenko, who I discovered obviously during the Ukraine war, and who doesn't love folk art? And I think folk art should exist forever and ever. And I just think this is amazing folk art, really. But I also want to add, I actually love outsider art, but I haven't got an outsider artist here. And then Elizabeth Newman, who haven't got a work, but have a great little paragraph. Newman's drawings exist before trauma. They come from before a lonely childhood. Their engine is innocence. To make them, Newman returns to a child state. She empties herself of experience. She calls this going to the nothing. Going to the nothing is like trying to get to what is the most me, she says. It's the most authentic, which is the way we think about it, the most primitive, the most infantile, or whatever. I love that. I wish I could say that was me, but I'm definitely in the trauma. I'm stuck in the trauma. I'm making the work in the trauma. I need to get it out. So, and then Toba Kaduri, who's also an Iraqi Australian artist who lives in LA. It's very hard to see, but she works on very, very big pieces of 350 GSM paper that she waxes, and the wax in the paper actually captures all the debris, all the insects that are in her space, in her studio or in her home. So there's a layer of the paper, then there's this wax that covers everything that exists in her studio, and then she makes these drawings that she kind of manages with the paper, which I just think is really beautiful. Just really beautiful work. Sorry, that was hard going. I'm going to read now, sorry. So the domestic space that I work from. So this is the writing, a combination of things that have come together. So Elevations 2023 to 2024 is a series of one scale drawings of doors that I've encountered through my life, depicting egress to unseen spaces, as well as entrances demarcating public and private experiences that link memories of my psychosexual development, Greek migrant upbringing, and creative interest in the notion of desire embedded within the built environment. This project, along with my drawing practice, developed deeply during Melbourne's long drawn-out lockdown in 2021, when I started thinking about re-imaging objects without a camera or a computer, and instead used my body and easily available materials to make art. I became interested in trying to image the uncapturable, and this led me to interrogate photographic theorist Adelaide's ideas of displacing the origins of photography from technology to the body politic. It provided a shift in my practice, which had previously sought to save locations on their way to being removed or recover sites erased through the traditional notions of photography, video, and other archival material. I began drawing with graphite and pencils as a durational experience and bodily presence, working on a vertical plane, sketching, colouring, and making notes and references in the margins, whilst remembering the doors as events that had happened rather than objects separate from my memories. For me, the semiotic turn to drawing also offers a tool for psychoanalytic inquiry, with the objects functioning as portholes to different times, spaces, and places, and a transgression of private and public space. All these doors are thresholds I've crossed in my life. I tried to access drawings of these buildings or find photographs. However, I become more interested in what my memory contains and how I reimagine these lost spaces and what I do with the blank spots in my memory and how I feel these narratives with fictions. The artist Mike Kalli says recovered memories are related to wish fulfillment. The recovered past is actually a screen memory, reflecting on present desires. Memories and desires are conflated. You can't separate them. As your desire changes, memory changes, and facts change to suit your desire. For me, the domestic and public door represents many markers of otherness, sexuality, class, race, and religion, but also represents shared archetypal symbolism of transition, metamorphosis, beginning and ends. The real and imagined architectural spaces include those found in my family home, a local church, and a school, and informative areas in the public realm related to my psychological and sexual developments. So the next section is called From Photography to Drawing, and in brackets, and back again. To further elaborate on the process undertaken for elevations, I would like to create some groundwork for how I approach the project in a broader context and make transparent some ideological concerns stemmed from a discipline-specific academic context and how I navigated working from photography into drawing. Preceding this project, I've been for some time exploring ways to slow down the veracity of the image, but I eventually decided to rely less on these literal photographic representations and to start to rely more on my photographic memory. The question for this project, Elevations, was, how can I reimagine things in my mind that I see as a photographic discourse that is archived in my body? Studying photography, you're trained to photograph what's in front of you, what's out there in the world. And now I'm trying to access some other evidence, something that's not literal and not mediated through our machinery or forms of fabrication. I started to find photography in that mode of seek something out there and capture it and make an image of it, didactic. It seemed to me that I was differing from my own self. I'm a body. I have a ways of filtering information through all my senses, and they are archived in some conscious or unconscious way. I wasn't relying enough on the corporeal archive that I am, and these observations came with their own inherent politics. What becomes important to me was trying to access things from myself, rather than trying to recreate or represent someone else's archive or photograph. Why don't I represent my own? Here I am using the word archive and photograph as a stand-in for the conscious and unconscious. This also comes with a risk, because accessing your unconscious isn't quantifiable and it can't be rewarded in the same way as finding a representation of your political discourse, objectifying it, and presenting it to the world as a measurable policy-driven outcome. So, the risk is in asking myself to work freely without really knowing. Photography, in its current iteration, has a strong affinity to navigating computer programs, technical apparatuses, and disabling a body. Disabling as in, let me, the computer, do the work for you. One step further removed from the human condition, and the author, and more aligned with being user-friendly, expedient, and privileging a legible image that is lacking a nuanced ethnocentric approach to making. I felt less engaged in the images I was making, spending hours in the printing room waiting, whilst the computer and the inkjet printer made an electric exchange. And I decided it was time to remove the machinery and come one step closer to making images through a direct exchange. All these effective techniques were disabling my productivity. The work still exists in the zone of photography, image making, and I've developed an analog approach to making an image akin to drawing, painting, and photography. The archive is what this section is called. My parents had a goat shed in Koroni, in the Peloponnese. They converted it into a holiday house and would go over to Greece and stay in this shed. It had 2 rooms and a little kitchen, single file beds tracing the perimeter of the space. The Mediterranean Sea whitewashed villages. I once lived on top of a hotel in the maids' quarters. This guy came over once and knocked on my door in the middle of the night in a pair of leopard print speedos, highly sexually charged Greece, winter, for family commitments related to palliative care. The door is an escape. When I began the project Elevations, I started to make notes as an archive of thresholds. I produced an image bank, a series of open tabs on my computer, photographs online, lectures on YouTube, and podcasts of artists I liked, and eventually notes and writing that formed a type of structure, a template for each work. In this instance, I started to rethink the archival and consider it as my conscious and unconscious that seeks to make historical information often lost or displaced physically present again. I elaborated to reassemble memories of events that I'd experienced that were a type of threshold between things or through things. As Foucault claims, archives are grouped together in distinct figures, composed together in accordance with multiple relations, maintained or blurred in accordance with specific regularities, or rather, interpolations of history and document as a way of working through the difficult zone between trauma and memory processed in different modalities. This was a way to produce an archive that can contradict a master narrative. This work that I made, Elevations, moves through or walks by or stands in front of conventional thresholds that have been subverted by other discourses that I have reassembled to challenge that dominant narrative. Right, I think that's the end of my record. Thanks for being patient. Yeah, so now I'm just going to walk through image by image. There's about 100. I'll go quick, of this kind of hermetic space that I created. But I will just say in my own words, this kind of archive that I'm talking about, maybe we can just think about it as notes that I took in order to make work. So I created some notes, but the notes were kind of grouped together into specific areas. So this was called Untitled Mykonos, and it was a combination of little bits and pieces of little legible pieces of writing that I wrote, where I was trying to re-image an image that was in my head and also try to kind of transport me to another place. So this image came from making all these notes, and the process was all about me in some sort of way becoming this kind of inkjet printer or a drawer. Having removed everything, I was now no longer taking photographs. I was learned through that lockdown period. Instead of giving up on that drawing practice that I developed, I thought I'd really push through with it and just keep going and just see what happens. Like, I'd learned so much from drawing, but why give up now kind of thing? And so I just kept going. It seemed really ridiculous and infantile because it didn't come from that kind of place. It came from a photographic place. But I just had to kind of just try and see what would happen. So I also found it very important to work in that horizontality. So it was easy when you were making small drawings sitting at the table, and then I decided when I was making these thresholds, there'll be these bodily things, and they had to be the size of another door, but also bigger than me in some way. So it was, every day was all about getting up and then lying down again. So it was actually a really comforting place to be, to get up and lie down, to be kind of stuck to the earth. It's grounding, and it's also a good way to kind of deal with a lot of stuff because you're just grounded in this kind of making. I always found it a lot harder to do it in that vertical space, which is why I thought that Richard Serra image seemed so heroic. Like, working in that way every day to me seems unrealistic. And I guess if you are going to be a maker, which I consider myself a maker, you really need to find a way that operates for you on a daily level that you can return to, and you know that you're being productive. And me lying in that kind of space is a very productive space for me. It's fertile. So I'm going to read this. I'm going to read it from the position of how it sounds in the catalogue, sorry. In Untitled Glory Hole, Pantazopoulos recreates a toilet door at the former Spencer Street station in Melbourne, where Pantazopoulos first observed homosexual activity. He says of the moment, "This was my first experience of homoerotic desire in the public space, and it was my first educational provocation that my feelings about homosexuality were not abnormal. This formative experience has driven lots of Pantazopoulos' enduring interest in working with the built environment, coded desires in architecture, and the continuing efforts to revisit or recreate the space and bring into it the present, something that remains in his psyche or memory." So these are just this was actually the starting point, and then that drawing came from this starting point. I was thinking about tracing an early memory of homosexual activity. Station on the Upfield line, getting off at Spencer Street Station on platform 9, public toilet, looking, glory hole, seeing men's bodies on the other side. The station has been demolished and replaced. Access the drawings to that building, interested in what my memory of it was. Fragments of a body, a train moving, taxonomy of images. And this was Untitled Security Door. I've only got 3, and then we'll just look at images. One more. Sorry. So this was the entrance to my parents' house and the house that I grew up in. This door was very much an important threshold from private to public, my security, index finger, and look out onto the street, passing, pixelated. It was very comforting. So then this is the drawing that came from it, and then the way the writing was changed for the catalogue. Untitled Security replicates the security door of his family home. A ubiquitous fluorescent screen with alterations to include a solid welded lock and key from the inside. In thinking about this particular door, Pantazopoulos is drawn to architectural theorist Paul Carter, who discusses the migrant carnival of Melbourne and the smell of kitchens coming through the fluorescent screen doors. Around the outside of the door, his parents left notes to strangers, religious groups, and family members. Sometimes visitors would leave letters and flowers to us, wedged between the diamond-shaped welded facade and the fly screen. Pantazopoulos reflects, "I used to trace the security door from the inside with my index finger and look out into the street, passing, pixelated. It was very comforting." So I haven't documented it for the rest of the project really, but in most of the drawings, I've got this kind of like formal thing that's happening, and around the outside of it, all these notes that I've created in the margins. And when I was doing these notes in the margins, I was actually actively thinking about how people are using AI and Midjourney and all these things, and how they're composing all these kind of language that they're placing into the computer so it spits out an image for them. And I do have a position on it, and I don't really kind of think it's a really great way to work. I kind of think it's, again, too removed from the bodily presence of making. It's a good experience, and I'm sure that I'm definitely going to make an IO work at some point, because my practice always seems to kind of move around. But just at this point, while I'm watching how sort of develop, I just kind of, and whilst I'd learned this kind of drawing practice, I just kind of found the way of that type of working somehow a little bit lazy maybe, or uninvested. Like it's not really invested in something. So, there's a big price to pay when you work in a university, and AI is kind of like the thing, but I really had to kind of make a decision, and that's the risk you make. Oops, delete that. I went to St. Ambrose Catholic School, and the priest, Father Mujoro, recently convicted of child abuse in the George Pell stories. He was a school priest and lived on the school premises in the private quarters. After school at 3:30 p.m, he'd step into the courtyard with a big box of donuts for us. I asked my parents if I could do my confirmation. So these drawings kind of start, those little bits of writing that are very kind of highly personal. I wouldn't say, they're just kind of memories from the past. They're not incredibly psychoanalytic, really, because they're way too structured. They're not like free speaking. They're just little moments, vignettes. Kind of led me to start making this work. And I guess when I started looking at this last night, I went, God, I really didn't know where to stop. Like I just kept going with the drawings, just kept going, going. But that was the kind of the privilege of just making something. There's a little bit of Greek writing that says, what stupidity. It's not a direct translation. Τι ανομαλίες είναι αυτές. I was thinking about conservative family people that would think the idea of making art is kind of so ridiculous and superfluous. And if you're in it to make money, it's the wrong kind of place to go. Art is really for something that really exists in you. You really want it. It's really important. So then this is just me building up this work called Untitled Priest. And I was both at once trying to remember the door at St. Ambrose Primary School, but I was also trying to remember this kind of the priests' outfits that they wore, these kind of very bejeweled things. But I'm really interested in rational abstraction, where I'm reducing something to its barest idea of maybe of what it is. So I really want to engage in this kind of abstraction, but I do want to kind of like toy a little bit with, maybe it's recognizable, maybe it's not. And I'm just kind of like toying in that area. So, it's just a very typical day of me walking around the big drawing and then me kind of making colors and stuff and thinking about colors. That is the end of the writing, promise. But, I'm in this domestic space and I'm thinking about how to make things, and you want to conserve as much as you can. So you use whatever's available to you in the house as stencils. You have a printer and, you print whatever out and you cut it out. And you're really trying to conserve and make possible. So plates become a drawing utensil, and everything becomes meaningful. Books. For me, rulers are, I can't live without rulers. I really didn't know when to stop. I just kept going and just kept going, like I need to stop. So as well as the writing, there are these little drawings that exist that I make, and they don't really kind of go at the beginning. They go somewhere in between when I've got the writing and I start mapping something out. Then I start making these little sketches, and these sketches kind of have the energy that I really want, but I want to work big, and then I've got to kind of make these decisions, and it's really hard to kind of work out what these decisions are. And this is for this door that I called Academic. When I started making this door, I just had gone on a long service leave and working in a university, you've got all these markers that you need to be kind of continually aware of. You're in class teaching all of you students, but you know, there's these scores that you get from students, then you've got these management kind of things, and then you've got all these other things that are coming at you. So I was thinking about how I would make a graph that represented this kind of threshold of the academic door. And so this long belt is this kind of metaphorical whip that you're going to get if you don't perform to target. So, and then there are all these kind of little squiggly things, which is me shitting myself if I don't do well. Even if I want to deny it, you know, you still want to do well. And so those pink things that are like the arrows are about all that kind of, so you enter the academic system being this prolific artist, or someone who's just done their PhD, very interested in ground in the context of art making. And then you become this really savvy Excel spreadsheet reader. That's really great at being a business professional. So, you know, learning the proper corporate language. And I really wanted to kind of evidence all that stuff, but I wanted to do it in a way that returned it back to art. So that was my kind of like playful exploration of the academic threshold of the door. More.
Mark just said he finally understands.
This is in no particular order, really, how I'm showing you. This is Untitled Orthodox, and that's just the blanket that I lie on. I always thought I'd lie on blanket 2 with the lover, and I have these amazing erotic images, but no, it's me in a drawing. I was really excited by looking at Toby Kaduri's work, the way that she kind of combined all these sheets of paper to make one big image. And I just thought I'd really wanted to kind of push this idea of the drawing and the door and the splitting. And so I made this thing called Untitled Orthodox, which at the top is this meant to be this kind of eye and the all-seeing eye, you know, and also acts as some sort of like aperture, camera aperture, but it's also like a head. And then I put the cross there because I grew up in this religious, non-religious environment. Like religion was there, but we weren't really religious, kind of operated as some ritual space. And so the door opening is the crucifix splitting and tearing apart. And I was kind of trying to just show this kind of like animated, using drawings, this animated space to tear this kind of belief apart, but keep it in some way there. What I also kind of learned from this particular drawing, apart from, you know, thinking about, it sounds very simple, but makers think about kind of, you know, it's a written language, it's a choreography just to make something. And sometimes you're not always using the vocabulary of them. You're using your bodily kind of ways of working and kind of being very quick. I was thinking about the choreography that I make when I'm drawing and the kind of shapes that I can make with my body. And although they're all straight, the bottom lines here were done in a very slow, methodical way, where I was just kind of filling in the page, and it was a meditative experience. Whereas when I was doing the top part, I was actually working very fast and frenetic with a ruler, and I had this kind of choreography set up that I'd practiced and that I knew that I had to do in a particular way. So it's kind of like tiptoeing around the circle, with the ruler, and moving back and forward. And these kind of like little inventions that I would make that was kind of like a hieroglyphic or a syntax or another language were really exciting to develop along the project. They really kind of made me feel very engaged in what I was doing. This is actually one of the earlier ones. And that's my Mike Kalli book. That's like a Bible, because he has lots and lots and lots of little proposals of things he wants to make that are just like a paragraph. And that was really inspiring to the whole project to see how he comes up with his ideas and just writes a little paragraph about something, and then it's contextualized a lot in retrospect later about what he did with some images. Highly recommend it. So this is me kind of making a work called Untitled Garden Shed, and me trying to remember and access some ideas about this garden shed that existed in my house. It took me ages to make, and it was because I didn't really understand the formal nature of how much I wanted to reveal and what I wanted to conceal, and playing with that idea of revealing and concealing things in the making process when it's so, there's a borderline, there's a place to take the work that does a lot of revealing without saying much, I think. This really hit me as like, when do you stop? I don't really know. I probably could have stopped here. This is Untitled Dressmaking School. And, I was trying to also do that thing of revealing and not reveal too much. And I really learned a lot about different types of pigments, actually. And in that collar there, I'm using this particular white kind of pencil that when you rub it, it turns to this leathery gloss, and it just changes the whole texture of the paper. And it was a really exciting kind of like thing to make the paper into another material. So this work, I was trying to kind of just let all my ideas happen and the narrative that was taking place unfold. And I never really quite knew when to stop. And I actually hated making this work, but it just seemed relevant to just let my ideas of aesthetics not hinder the narrative that was unfolding. Any champion. So I ended up getting to that. This is Untitled Bedroom. I was thinking about the abject things that you do and how do you kind of like talk about abjectness. So that was the beginning of the drawing. And then the work turned into a little bit more kind of this. And I was just exploring another way of using forms to think about writing. I was using drawing and mark making, but thinking about the language of writing and hieroglyphics and how you can transform, how you can bring maybe a meaning to a shape. So that's important because I wanted to make sure this thing here that says the hysterics discourse, and I've been in psychoanalysis for a while, and it's something that is really about a self-study. It's not about cure. It's about a study and investing in that study. And I found the hysterics discourse of the discourses that Lacan talks about a very kind of important discourse for me. It's the one I related to the most. So in some way, this kind of abject notion of this drawing is about the hysterics discourse. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time. I've got about 2 minutes. So I'll race through and then show you how it looks. in the final presentation. I'll just go to one more thing. That's me making a ruler. I needed to make a ruler so I can make big curves. So that ruler is so I can make these things. So there was more of me ad hoc thinking of things that I would use. And these things are not transparent when you're looking at the final thing, at an image of a drawing. You're only seeing a drawing, so you don't really know what you're using to make. No one ever kind of questions that. It's only made transparent in sculpture or some sculpture. Sorry. And so that's more of kind of thinking of tools to use to make shapes. So then we are in the gallery. This is where I end. So this is the work installed in the room. So it goes academic, orthodox, and on the floor is priest. And then from the far corner is security, garden shed, dressmaking school, glory hole, the bedroom, Mykonos. And that's queer club. And that's gay church, final yellow one. Yeah, so thanks for listening. Sorry for the ages.
Nik, thank you so much for no, not at all. It's just so generous of you. And firstly, congratulations on the whole work. If you haven't been to Adelaide, you need to go and see it soon. I think it's until, is it June?
Yeah.
I think it's till June. It's a really spectacular biennial, but Nik's work is certainly one of the standouts. So congratulations on that. Thank you so much for the vulnerability and generosity in today's talk. We've got a few minutes for some burning questions. Look, there are questions all over the place. So yeah, please.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think I'm outside the door. I'm on the surface. I think I'm conscious it's a drawing, so I'm on the surface. But having said that, I think in Untitled Orthodox, I'm somewhere between in and out of that draw. Yeah, please.
Thanks, Nik. Two quick questions, they're kind of related. And David, I'm glad you mentioned the word vulnerability because that was resonating for me throughout your talk. And I remember you saying to me maybe 15 years ago after I gave a talk to students at RMIT that how you value the strength in vulnerability. And I'm interested in that and how that kind of presents, but also the redacted text I'm curious about because is it a conceit? Like, what are you redacting? And because you're giving a lot of information, and yeah, I'm curious about that.
What's the conceit word?
Is it an affectation to
remove it?
The text.
Oh, so I think the ones you're talking about, the ones about the black lines.
Yeah.
So when I started doing that, and I was sharing it with certain people, but particularly with the museum curators. There's some of it that's quite graphic, and it wasn't. This isn't the first time it's happened either. I've done another project I wrote, and for another museum where they ask your work to be available to someone who's 15 and someone who's 80. And I was speaking in specifics about my age, the way I negotiated things at a particular time in my life. And they asked me if I could remove those bits because they were a little bit too graphic. And at first I was like, oh, you know, why? And then I thought, actually, yeah, it's really, I'm doing that in my drawings. Why can't I learn to be reductive in my writing as well? And I'm trying to be as quick and as condensed as possible anyway. So, yeah.
So they were for publication, those texts?
Yes. Yeah, that's it's then for public viewing.
One more? Yeah, please.
I'm really interested in the way that you set up yourself when you're making work. You're at home. There's a lot of blankets and pillows, and you're investing in these works that are quite laborious and by universe with deep into trauma and deep to the core memories of yourself. Do you think that the way that you set yourself up to work enables you to stay? Does it give you stamina?
Yes, I don't. Yes, very much so. I'm like, it's true. You're most vulnerable when you're lying like that. But I've created a safe space for myself to do that, and I'm really conscious that I have this time to do it. It's kind of a privilege. It's a real privilege to make art. It's a real privilege. So when you're in that kind of zone and you're given that kind of luxury to do it, you really want to take advantage. You want to run with it. So it's a very, yeah, you do. It's, well, not, well, I don't, you sort of do, you sort of don't really. Like once you're in the zone, you can go for 8 hours. I think you're doing a lot of things, kind of, you're crawling around the room a lot, and you're on your, well, I'm on my knees and I've got pillows and I've got my drawing utensils. You know, towards the end, I wanted to experiment more with different types of pigments, and I wanted to use wetter things, but because of the type of paper I'm using,